Today at Story Pack, we've been doing yoga and mindfulness with children. Stick around if you'd like to find out how that went and why yoga is good for growing minds. Hey, I'm Hilary. Welcome to Nap Time, the Early Learning web series. Today I'm sitting here with Nikki, who teaches yoga to children. Thanks for joining us, Nikki.
Thank you.
Would you like to tell me about how you got started with teaching yoga to children?
I was working in a surf camp in southern Morocco. It was like a little tiny fishing Berber village. And the experience was pretty amazing. It was like this terrace overlooking the ocean and all this landscape. And a lot of the clientele would be families coming on these surf vacations, and they'd also have their young children with them. And not only were they doing surfing, but they'd come and they would do yoga. And so in the beginning, I thought the experience was quite daunting. I was like, I've never taught yoga to children, you know? And then after I really began to enjoy the experience, and especially getting to know the kids for like the week they were there and having them come and take practice in the evenings after surfing. And I thought it was just so supplemental because not only like are they spending their time in nature throughout the day surfing, but then they'd come and we'd all be watching a sunset and doing different yoga poses. And it was just something I really got to enjoy. Just recently, I was in Greece, and the big crisis right now is the migrant and Syrian refugee crisis. And there are a lot of children and a lot of children with traumatic backgrounds and also just a lot of idle time. More so, I came with the idea of teaching yoga with the women, but it was children that gravitated more towards the yoga because I think the women just had so much going on in their minds that they had other things to deal with. And it was just all these children just roaming around the refugee camp. And it was just such a great experience. Like, it was just having fun and moving in different poses and kind of getting off their minds off of like, what will happen? Will they seek asylum? Will they go back? And I thought it was very useful to create a mindful practice for the children to just kind of get their minds off of where they are and what the situation is. So especially for children with trauma, I think getting that mindfulness in terms of breathing, staying present, and kind of allowing all that excess distraction and all the excess to kind of just come down and bring it back down and creating a more homeostasis and harmony.
What are the challenges of teaching yoga to children? I imagine there are a lot of differences between teaching to adults as opposed to children.
Yeah, I think you come into it not expecting the same thing you would with adults. You're not necessarily looking for a long string of focus. And especially, I say it's the same thing when you come into a new meditation practice. Some days it's easier and some days it's harder depending on the energy level. It's also being patient, knowing that the attention will be there and then it'll go. And you know, when we're in a meditation practice, like we're being meditative and we're focusing on our breath, but then something else comes up. And it's just kind of understanding the fluctuations of our mind.
So if you are teaching a yoga class with children, is it typically shorter than with adults?
Exactly. It's like, it's shorter, and knowing that one kid might stray off or they might just like watch, or, you know, so it's just kind of allowing. And then eventually they'll start to get it, you know, so it's just kind of not coming with any real rigid guidelines, but knowing that the message will eventually start to come across.
Yeah. So like earlier when we were doing that yoga, there was some kids joined in for part of the time and they wandered off. Some decided they actually wanted to run around, but you just carried on. Is that quite typical of a yoga class with children?
Absolutely. It's totally typical. And eventually I think they start to understand like, oh, like, I feel my breath, or I feel, it's kind of like in the beginning where like you have nap times as children, right? Yeah. And how nap time kind of balances up the child. It could very much be like that. For them, it's more introspective because they start to understand like, oh, when I go to yoga, I feel like more calm.
So do you think children can meditate? Do you think maybe it's even easier for them to, because as adults we don't know how to calm our minds, but perhaps it's different?
Exactly. I think it's so much easier for a child to pick up a meditation practice, in my opinion, in terms of like, you never hear a child complaining of bad sleep. Like, so much on my mind, I didn't sleep. My stock market, or like whatever. So much starts to change as we get older. And if we had instilled those kind of practices when we were younger, things would be a lot different as we got older. Like I think we're living in the current time of like high stress, and like the world is in like, a very sensitive state. And I think the practice of yoga and the practice of meditation really allows us to be selfless and really allows us to see things for what they really are without getting the ego too involved.
Something that I think other people as well as me might wonder about is with growing bodies, is yoga, can it be bad for children to do yoga when their bodies are developing and muscles are really changing all the time?
No, and it's funny because when you start to look at the history of yoga, especially Ashtanga, it was actually for young boys. So it was the part, and in India, the higher class were doing yoga, right? And so the boys would be having like very kind of strict yoga practices, and they saw this of value. You can tailor a yoga practice to the individual. So no matter what the body shape, no matter what the history, I think yoga is really just the yoking, the union of the mind. So whenever there's movement with breath, that's yoga. Sitting here, closing your eyes, and observing the qualities of your breath is yoga.
Do you have an example of a pose that you would teach to children, and the shape it would make, and how you would teach it?
I think a really good one to start with is like always having your arms overhead, and I'd say kind of growing like a tree, right? And then having them look up at the hands and then exhaling. And why I do this posture is because it's simple for them to do and it's dynamic, right? So it kind of gets them, you inhale as the arms come up and then exhale as the arms come down. Inhale and exhale, right? So they start to get into that idea of breath every time their arms move up. And then from there, having them hold that and like growing like a tree. And then we'd grow from there, like in terms of picking up the leg and just like that. But having something moving with the breath and then building onto that.
Kindergartens are quite hectic, there's a lot going on. Does that matter? Does it matter if it's loud and there's things happening everywhere?
I think essentially that will be a challenging point in terms of even children wanting to get involved with what else is going on. And it's much like if we remember when we were children sitting in the classroom and like looking outside the hall. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to instill mindfulness, like this idea of just being in your space and being in your body. So essentially, whatever's going on in the external, it's bringing the attention back into the individual, back into their space, back into the mat. And that may be harder to achieve at first, but eventually always working towards that.
Do you have tips for parents if they wanted to bring yoga into their children's life at home?
Yeah, do yoga with your kids. That's like such a fun way. Like every Saturday we all do yoga as a family, And if the child sees that the parents are doing yoga, they'll naturally want to join in, Doing yoga with loved ones is great. It creates like such a awesome union. Definitely getting involved as a parent and like sharing it with your child. And everyone can get the benefits of it.
Thanks for watching Nap Time. I hope you feel really inspired to integrate more yoga and mindfulness into your lives. Make sure you check out our channel to see the other episodes, and also don't forget to subscribe.